The afternoon sun blazed softly across the small town of Lekki outskirts. The streets buzzed with the sound of honking tricycles and children chasing kites. Amid the noise, Amira Okoro, a slender young woman with cocoa-brown skin and tired eyes, walked carefully with a tray of fruits balanced on her head. Her faded yellow blouse clung lightly to her skin, and her long skirt swayed with each step. Despite her modest appearance, there was a quiet grace in the way she moved, the kind born from hardship and dignity. She stopped by the roadside to add just her load when she noticed an elderly woman struggling to cross the uneven pavement. The woman stumbled, her handbag flying open, scattering coins and papers into the dusty wind. Without hesitation, Amira dropped her tray and ran to her side. "Ma, are you all right?" she asked, gently helping the woman to her feet. The old woman blinked, surprised. "Oh dear. I didn't see that stone. Thank you, my child." Amira smiled warmly. "You should be careful. The road is rough here." Madame Grace, though Amira didn't yet know her name, studied the girl's face. There was something striking about her simplicity. Her dark brown eyes shimmered with honesty, her voice carried calm warmth. "Young lady," the old woman said kindly, "not many would stop to help a stranger these days." Amira shrugged shyly. "It's nothing, Ma. My mother taught me that kindness costs nothing." The woman chuckled softly. "Your mother raised you well. Tell me, what's your name?" "Amira," she said. "I work at the bakery by the market." Madame Grace nodded, pretending to pick the scattered coins, but her mind was elsewhere. Such humility, she thought. Such pure heart. Something my son has forgotten even exists. Before leaving, Madame Grace asked for her number. "You remind me of my younger self, Amira. I'd like to keep in touch, maybe thank you properly someday." Amira hesitated, then gave her the number, smiling shyly. "It's nothing, Ma, really." "Everything is something when done from the heart," Madame Grace replied, touching her shoulder affectionately before leaving in her chauffeur-driven car. That evening, in a sprawling mansion nestled in Ikoyi, Madame Grace walked into her son's private study. The space glowed under warm amber lights, lined with books, glass walls overlooking the city skyline. Leonard Cole, her only son, sat behind his mahogany desk, his sharp jawline illuminated by the screen's glow. His expression was one of habitual indifference, calm, cold, unreadable. "Leonard," she began, setting her purse down, "you won't believe who I met today." He didn't look up. "Mother, unless it's about business or the new foundation, I'm not interested." She sighed, walking closer. "Always business. Never heart. You're 30, my son. When will you learn that money isn't everything?" Leonard leaned back, closing his laptop. "Love," he said dryly, "is an investment with no returns. I've seen enough betrayals to know better." Madame Grace's eyes softened. She knew he still carried scars from the woman who left him years ago. "Well," she said playfully, "maybe this investment will surprise you." He frowned. "What are you planning again, Mother?" "Nothing, you won't thank me for later," she replied with a sly grin. 3 days passed. Amira had almost forgotten about the encounter when her phone rang while she arranged bread loaves at the bakery. "Hello? Hello, my dear. It's Madame Grace. Remember me?" Amira smiled, surprised. "Oh, yes, Ma. How are you?" "I'm wonderful, thanks to you. I'd love to see you again. Could you visit me tomorrow evening? I want to introduce you to someone very special." Amira hesitated. She had never been to a rich person's home before. "I'll come, Ma," she finally said. The next evening, Amira arrived at the Grand Cole mansion, clutching her small purse nervously. The gate guards ushered her in with polite bows. Her eyes widened as she walked through the marble-floored hallway. Chandeliers glimmered, paintings adorned every wall, and the air smelled of roses and money. "Welcome, my dear," Madame Grace greeted, hugging her warmly. "You look beautiful." Amira blushed. She wore a simple blue gown and silver sandals, her best outfit. "Thank you, Ma." From the corner of the room, Leonard appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black shirt that highlighted his toned arms. His presence was commanding yet distant. "Leonard," Madame Grace said, "this is Amira, the girl I told you about." Their eyes met, his cold, hers nervous. He nodded curtly. "Nice to meet you." They sat for dinner. The table was elegantly set, candlelight flickering against crystal glasses. As they ate, Madame Grace subtly poured a few drops of a clear liquid into their wine glasses while chatting cheerfully. "So, Amira," she asked, smiling, "do you have a boyfriend?" Amira nearly choked on her drink. "No, Ma. I've never really had time for such things." Madame Grace chuckled. "That's good. Focus on the right man, someone responsible, respectful." Maybe rich? Leonard shot his mother a warning look, but she only smiled innocently. Moments later, their laughter grew lighter, their eyes softer. The food seemed to taste sweeter, the air warmer. Leonard found himself staring at her lips as she spoke. "You're different," he murmured suddenly. Amira blinked. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "You don't pretend." Their eyes lingered on each other, something magnetic, unexplainable pulling them closer. Hours passed, and the soft piano music from the living room floated through the halls. Both felt strangely dizzy yet peaceful. Amira stood to leave, but Leonard caught her wrist gently. "Stay. Just for a while," he whispered. She hesitated, but the warmth in his voice disarmed her. Their lips brushed, slow, uncertain, then deepened. The world faded. Madame Grace, peeking from the corridor, smiled in triumph. Finally, she whispered, "My grandchild will soon come." Sunlight streamed through the cream curtains. Amira stirred awake, her head pounding. The silk bedsheet felt unfamiliar. She turned and froze. Leonard was beside her, bare-chested, his eyes fluttering open. Their gazes locked in mutual horror. "What happened last night?" Amira asked, clutching the sheet to her chest. I don't remember," Leonard muttered, sitting up in confusion. Before they could think, the door burst open. Madame Grace entered with a wide grin. "Good morning, lovebirds," she sang. "Mother?" Leonard exclaimed, startled. Amira gasped, embarrassed. Madame Grace clasped her hands joyfully. "Am expecting my grandchild soon." "What?" They both shouted in unison. Their shocked faces froze, a picture of disbelief, fear, and confusion, while Madame Grace simply turned and walked out humming a happy tune. The sun had already climbed high when Amira stepped out of the Cole mansion gates. The early morning chill had lifted, replaced by the heavy warmth of Lagos daylight. She walked fast, clutching her small purse tightly, heart racing with shame and disbelief. Her mind swirled with broken flashes. Laughter at dinner, dizziness, his eyes, the warmth of his hand, the blinding fog that followed. It couldn't be real. Could it? She stopped briefly on the roadside, tears gathering in her eyes. "I didn't plan this," she whispered to herself, voice trembling. "God, I didn't." A passing taxi honked. She quickly waved it down, climbed in, and buried her face in her palms. Back inside the mansion, Leonard Cole stood by the large glass window, staring into the garden below where Amira's silhouette had just disappeared. His fists clenched by his side. He turned sharply toward his mother, who sat calmly at the breakfast table sipping tea. "Tell me the truth, mother," he said through gritted teeth. "What did you do?" Madame Grace didn't even flinch. "You make it sound as though I committed a crime." "You did something," he snapped. "Neither of us remembers what happened after dinner. That's not coincidence." She set down her cup gently. "Leonard, my son, you've locked your heart for too long. I simply wanted to open it." His voice rose. "By drugging us?" Her smile remained faint but deliberate. "By letting destiny speak louder than pride." Leonard exhaled sharply, anger and confusion fighting for dominance. "You had no right, mother. You've humiliated that girl, and me." Madame Grace stood and walked closer, her eyes soft but unyielding. "I see the way you looked at her. You felt something. Maybe you're just afraid to admit it." Leonard stepped back, jaw tight. "Whatever I felt, you destroyed it the moment you interfered." He turned and walked out, his expression a storm of frustration. The taxi stopped before a small one-room house with peeling paint and a rusted roof. Amira stepped out slowly, wiping her eyes. Her younger brother, Tund, about 12, ran up to her. "Sis, you're back early." She forced a smile, trying to sound normal. "Yes, I just finished work." He frowned. "You look sick. Did something happen?" Amira knelt beside him, brushing his hair gently. "Nothing, Tund. Just tired." When he left to fetch water, her smile collapsed. She entered their tiny room, sat on the edge of the bed, and hugged herself tightly. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying Leonard's confused face, his mother's knowing smile. "How could I ever face them again?" she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. At the mansion, Leonard paced his study. Files lay forgotten on his desk. His assistant called twice, he ignored both times. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push Amira's image away, her nervous smile, the softness in her voice, the innocence in her eyes. He slammed his fist lightly against the desk. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "She's just some girl my mother tricked me into meeting." But his heart didn't agree. Something deeper had stirred that night, something he hadn't felt in years. Finally, he grabbed his car keys. "If I don't get answers, I'll never rest," he said under his breath. Late that afternoon, the sound of a sleek black car engine echoed through Amira's narrow street. Neighbors peeked out curiously as the billionaire's car parked in front of her small house. Amira, hearing the noise, stepped out, her eyes widening in disbelief. Leonard stood beside the car, tall and commanding even in simple clothes. "Leonard?" she breathed. He took a cautious step closer. "We need to talk." She shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. "Please, I don't want trouble. I didn't plan any of this. I swear I didn't." "I know," he interrupted softly. "That's why I'm here." She blinked, unsure whether to trust him. "I'm not accusing you, Amira," he continued. "But something isn't right. I need to know what really happened that night." Her lips parted to speak, but words failed. She looked down, tears forming again. "I don't remember anything either," she said finally. "Your mother. She said she's expecting a grandchild." Leonard's jaw tightened. "Yes. She's delusional." He hesitated, then his tone softened. "I just needed to see you. To make sure you were okay." The kindness in his voice caught her off guard. She nodded weakly. "I'm fine. Just confused." He gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "You're not the only one." They stood in silence, two strangers bound by something neither could explain. The air between them felt charged, awkward yet tender. "I'll figure this out," Leonard said at last, stepping back toward his car. "And when I do, I'll make things right." She watched him drive off, her heart pounding. For the first time, she didn't see him as the arrogant billionaire she'd met at dinner, but as a man fighting something even he couldn't control. Back at the mansion, Madame Grace stood on the balcony, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. A knowing smile curved her lips as she spoke softly to herself. "You can fight fate all you want, my son," she murmured. "But the heart always finds its way." The days that followed were quiet but heavy. Amira tried to return to her small cleaning job at a local office, but her mind refused to focus. Every time she closed her eyes, Leonard's confused yet gentle expression flashed before her. Her phone stayed silent, no messages, no calls. She tried convincing herself it was better that way, that their lives belonged to different worlds. But deep down she knew something had changed inside her that night, something she couldn't name, something she couldn't ignore. One humid morning, Amira woke with a dull ache in her stomach. She sat up slowly, pressing her hand to her chest as dizziness washed over her. Maybe she had skipped dinner, she thought. Or maybe the stress was catching up. But when she tried to stand, a wave of nausea hit her so hard she stumbled back onto the bed. She sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Her heart started to pound. No, it can't be. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Madame Grace was in her bedroom, humming softly as she arranged flowers into a vase. The morning light fell on her graceful face, highlighting the calm satisfaction in her eyes. Her assistant, Mrs. Uche, entered carrying a tray of tea. "Ma, you've been smiling all morning," she said curiously. "Good news?" Madame Grace's lips curled into a knowing grin. "Just a mother's intuition," she replied. "Something tells me my dream will soon come true." "Dream?" "Yes," she said quietly. "A grandchild, and a woman who can heal my son's lonely heart." Mrs. Uche looked puzzled. "You mean, the girl from the other night?" Grace turned slowly, her eyes sharp but full of pride. "Mark my words, Uche. Fate already decided. That girl will carry my son's blood." Leonard had been restless for days. He buried himself in work at his company's headquarters, Coal Industries, but even in board meetings his thoughts kept drifting back to Amira. He remembered the way she'd looked at him that afternoon, frightened but honest. There was something rare about her, something pure. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "Why can't I forget her?" His assistant knocked softly and stepped in. "Sir, your mother has been asking for you," the man said. Leonard frowned. "Not again." He stood, grabbed his car keys and left the office. Amira sat outside her small house that evening, watching children play by the roadside. Her mind was racing. She hadn't eaten all day and the strange feeling in her body was growing stronger. Then her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Amira, my dear," came Madame Grace's cheerful voice. Amira froze. "Ma'am? How have you been, child?" Grace asked warmly. "You've been on my mind lately. I wanted to check on you." Amira swallowed hard. I'm fine, Ma." "Good. I was thinking, why don't you come by the mansion tomorrow? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." "Don't be afraid. You'll always be welcome in my home." Amira's heart pounded. She didn't want to face Leonard again. But her curiosity and her fear wouldn't let her say no. "I'll come, Ma," she whispered. "Excellent," Grace said softly. "See you soon, my dear." When the call ended, Amira sat there in silence. Something about Madame Grace's tone made her uneasy. The next day, Amira stood nervously before the grand gates once more. The guard recognized her and quickly opened them. She walked through the wide garden, her hands trembling. Madame Grace was waiting at the doorway, dressed in a cream lace gown, her face glowing with joy. "My dear Amira," she said warmly, taking her hands. "You look pale. Are you eating well?" Amira forced a smile. "Yes, ma. Just a little tired." Grace's eyes flickered knowingly. "Sit, my dear. Let's have tea." As they sat in the bright living room, Amira couldn't shake the feeling that Grace was watching her too closely, like a woman who already knew a secret she herself hadn't discovered. Just then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. Amira's eyes widened as Leonard entered the room. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her sitting there. "Amira?" he said softly. She stood quickly, nervous. "Good afternoon, sir." Grace smiled like a proud matchmaker. "Perfect timing, Leonard. I was just serving tea." Leonard gave his mother a suspicious look, then turned to Amira. "What brings you here?" "She called me," Amira said honestly. "She said she wanted to talk." Grace poured the tea with a serene expression. "I just missed her kindness. She's a rare soul." Leonard's gaze softened slightly. "I see." For a few moments, silence filled the air, thick, awkward, and strangely tender. Then Leonard asked quietly, "Are you okay? You look pale." Amira hesitated. "I'm fine, sir. Just not feeling too well lately." Madame Grace's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, though she hid it behind a gentle smile. "Maybe it's just the weather," she said calmly. Leonard looked from his mother to Amira, suspicion flickering again, but this time, there was also a strange, unspoken concern. That night, Amira lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Her heartbeat thumped against her ribs. Every sign, every symptom, it all made sense now. Her hand moved to her stomach, trembling. Tears filled her eyes as the truth finally sank in. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. Outside, the night wind rustled the trees. Far away in his mansion, Leonard stood alone on his balcony, looking at the same stars, feeling an emptiness he couldn't explain. Two hearts, miles apart, bound by a night neither could remember. And a life neither of them expected. The next morning, Amira woke up before dawn. The street outside was still half asleep, the air cool and still. Her heart thudded in her chest as she held the small paper bag she had bought from the pharmacy the night before. Inside it was a pregnancy test. Her hands trembled as she tore open the box. The cheap plastic stick looked harmless, yet it held the power to change her entire life. Minutes felt like hours. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the little window on the test. Then she saw it. 2 faint pink lines. Her breath caught. She blinked hard, hoping it was a mistake. But when she looked again, the lines were still there, clear and undeniable. Her knees weakened and she sank to the floor, tears filling her eyes. "I'm carrying his child," she whispered. "The billionaire's child." The thought was both terrifying and impossible. What would he think of her? Would he believe she didn't plan it? Her trembling hands covered her face as she cried silently. At the same moment, miles away in the Cole mansion, Madame Grace stood in the garden feeding her doves. The early morning sun touched her silver hair, and a serene smile curved her lips. Without turning, she said softly to herself, "It's done. I can feel it." Her assistant, Mrs. Uche, approached, puzzled. "Ma, feel what?" Grace turned to her with calm authority. "A new life has begun." Mrs. Uche blinked. "You mean?" Grace nodded proudly. "Yes, my grandchild is on the way. And soon my son will have no choice but to open his heart." Leonard sat at his office desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. 4 days he couldn't focus on anything. Every report, every meeting felt like background noise. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right about that night. The gaps in his memory haunted him. He leaned back, rubbing his temple. "Why can't I remember?" His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. "Dinner tonight. Don't be late." He sighed heavily. Something in his gut told him it wasn't just a family dinner. By afternoon, Amira sat outside her home, watching Tun chase a worn-out ball down the street. Her thoughts were heavy, her future uncertain. She knew she had to tell someone, but who would believe her? Leonard was a billionaire, she was just a poor cleaner from the slums. As she thought about it, tears welled up again. Then her phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello?" She answered shakily. Amira, came Leonard's voice, low and calm. Her heart jumped. "Sir?" "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything that happened. I feel something's missing. I can't explain it, but I need to see you again." She hesitated, torn between fear and the need to tell him the truth. Okay, she said quietly. When? Tonight, he replied. My mother's hosting dinner. You're invited too. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Dinner? With your mother? Yes, Leonard said softly. Please come. I'll send my driver. When the call ended, Amira's stomach twisted. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. That evening, the Cole mansion glowed under crystal chandeliers. The dining hall shimmered with gold cutlery and white roses. Madame Grace sat at the head of the table, radiant in a flowing royal blue gown, her eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. Leonard sat opposite her, tense, suspicious. When Amira entered, escorted by a housekeeper, both turned to look. She wore a modest cream dress, her hair brushed neatly, but nervousness filled her eyes. Ah, my dear Amira, Grace said warmly. Welcome home. Amira forced a smile. Good evening, Ma. Leonard stood to pull her chair. Please sit. Dinner began in uneasy silence. The clinking of cutlery echoed through the hall. Leonard kept glancing at her, noticing how pale she looked, how her hands shook slightly. Finally, he leaned forward. Are you okay? Amira hesitated, her throat tightening. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Madame Grace interrupted gently. She's fine, my dear, Grace said with a soft smile. In fact, I think she's carrying something very precious. Leonard frowned. Mother. Amira's eyes widened. Ma? Grace set down her spoon delicately. Don't act surprised, child. A mother always knows. You're expecting, aren't you? The room fell silent. Amira froze, her hands trembling. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded slowly. Leonard's chair scraped against the marble floor as he stood abruptly. What? He said, disbelief flooding his voice. Pregnant? Amira couldn't meet his eyes. Madame Grace smiled calmly, her tone triumphant. Congratulations, my son. You're going to be a father. Leonard's world spun. He turned toward Amira, confusion, anger, and shock in his eyes. Amira, tell me this isn't true. Her lips trembled. I didn't plan it, sir. I swear. I didn't even know until today. Grace stood, her expression proud and serene. You see, Leonard? Fate has chosen for you. Leonard's eyes hardened. No, mother. You chose for me. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Amira broke down in tears, while Madame Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't cry, my dear, she said softly. I'll come around. Men always do, especially when love is written in destiny. Later that night, Amira sat alone in the guest room Madame Grace had offered her. The room was luxurious, soft bed, silk curtains, golden lamps, but she felt like a stranger trapped in a dream she didn't belong in. Her tears soaked the pillow. How will he ever believe me? She whispered. Downstairs in his private study, Leonard stood by the window, staring into the night. He was angry, but also afraid. Afraid of the truth, and of how much he already cared. The morning after the dinner was eerily quiet in the Cole mansion. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off polished marble floors, but the atmosphere was heavy, thick with unspoken words. Amira sat at the edge of the bed in the guest room, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. Her mind replayed every word Madame Grace said last night. You're expecting, aren't you? Congratulations, my son. You're going to be a father. Each sentence echoed like thunder. She didn't mean for any of it to happen, yet fate had woven her into a story she could never have imagined. Tears welled in her eyes again. I have to tell him everything. The truth, she whispered. Downstairs, Leonard sat alone in the study, still in the clothes from the night before. His tie hung loose, his hair messy, and his face pale from lack of sleep. He stared at a half-empty glass of whiskey, untouched. His thoughts were chaos. He wanted to be angry, at Amira, at his mother, at the entire situation. But deep down he knew something didn't add up. The last thing he remembered from that night was dinner, laughter, his mother smiling, and then nothing. No memory. Just a blank. He clenched his jaw. Someone's hiding something. His mother's words from the previous night haunted him. Fate has chosen for you. He exhaled sharply. Or maybe, you did, mother. Amira gathered her courage and walked down the long hallway. Each step echoed, her heart pounding. When she reached the study door, she hesitated. Her hands were trembling as she knocked softly. Come in, Leonard's voice called out, low and firm. She stepped inside. He looked up, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was thick, charged with tension. Finally, Amira whispered, Sir. I'm sorry. Leonard stood slowly, his gaze sharp. Sorry for what, Amira? For lying? For trapping me? Or for hiding the truth? Tears filled her eyes. No, I didn't trap you. I swear I didn't even know until yesterday. Please believe me. He scoffed. Believe you? Do you even realize what this means? You're carrying my child, and I don't even remember touching you. Her voice broke. Neither do I. He froze. She wiped her tears, shaking. That night, your mother invited me for dinner. We ate, we talked, and then everything went blank. I woke up beside you the next morning, confused and scared. Leonard's eyes narrowed. My mother? Amira nodded. She gave us wine. I didn't know. Maybe it was drugged. For a long moment, he just stared at her, realization dawning, anger building beneath his calm expression. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. My God. Amira sobbed softly. I didn't plan this. I never wanted your money or your name. I only helped your mother that day because it was the right thing to do. Leonard turned back to her, guilt flickering across his face. And now you're paying the price for her plan. Their eyes met, hurt, confusion, but also something unspoken. The door opened quietly and Madame Grace walked in, dressed elegantly in white. Her expression was calm, almost proud. I see you've both finally spoken, she said smoothly. Leonard's tone was sharp. Mother, what did you do? Grace arched an eyebrow. What was necessary? What was necessary? Leonard's voice rose. You drugged us. You manipulated us into love, Grace interrupted softly. Or what could become love? Amira stepped back horrified. Ma, how could you? Grace sighed. You both needed a push. Leonard, you've rejected every woman I introduced you to. Amira, you have a heart full of kindness. I only wanted my son to see what I saw in you. Leonard's voice shook with controlled fury. You had no right to choose for me. Grace met his gaze calmly. Maybe not. But I gave you something you wouldn't have had the courage to take yourself. A chance at happiness. The silence that followed was unbearable. Amira whispered, happiness built on deceit can never last. Grace looked at her with an odd tenderness. Perhaps. But sometimes lies are what lead us to truth. Leonard turned to Amira, his voice quieter now. You should go home. I need time to think. She hesitated, tears glistening in her eyes. Leonard, I'm sorry. He looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then he said softly, I know. As she turned to leave, his eyes followed her, a mixture of anger, regret, and an emotion he couldn't yet name. Grace watched silently, a faint smile on her lips as the door closed behind Amira. Leonard turned to his mother. If you ever interfere in my life again? Grace interrupted with a gentle smile. You'll thank me one day. He glared at her, voice cold. Don't count on it. He stormed out, leaving her standing alone, but her smile never faded. She whispered to herself, Hell see. When he looks into that child's eyes, he'll see everything I saw. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, washing over the city like a cleansing storm. Amira stood under the mansion's gate roof, clutching her small bag to her chest as thunder rumbled in the distance. She whispered to herself, I'll raise this child with or without him. A tear rolled down her cheek, but her eyes burned with new strength. As the rain poured harder, she stepped into the street, leaving footprints behind on the wet pavement. Unaware that Leonard was watching from the window above, torn between pride and longing. 3 days had passed since the storm. Leonard sat alone in his skyscraper office, staring blankly at the skyline of Lagos glittering under the fading evening sun. The city looked alive, but he felt empty inside. He had tried to drown himself in work, signing contracts, attending meetings, pretending everything was fine. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Amira's trembling lips, her tearful eyes as she walked away in the rain. He loosened his tie and sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This shouldn't hurt, he muttered to himself. But why does it? He remembered her voice, soft, sincere, pleading for him to believe her. And deep down he knew she was telling the truth. His phone buzzed, his mother again. He ignored it. This time he needed to think for himself. Meanwhile, in her small one-room home, Amira sat by a flickering oil lamp, sewing a torn uniform for her little brother, Tund. Her belly was still flat, but she could already feel subtle changes in her body, small signs of the new life growing inside her. Tund ran up to her, holding a drawing. Sister, I drew us in a big house, with a garden and a car. She smiled weakly, her heart breaking at his innocence. It's beautiful, Tund. He tilted his head. Will the rich man you work for give you a job again? Amira hesitated. Maybe. Someday. When Tund ran off, she placed her hand gently on her stomach and whispered, Someday, my little one, you'll know the truth. I didn't choose this path, but I'll walk it for you. That afternoon, a black SUV stopped in front of Amira's house. When the door opened, Madame Grace stepped out, dressed in elegant cream silk, her silver hair covered by a scarf. The neighbors peeked curiously through their windows as she knocked gently on Amira's door. Amira froze when she saw her. "Ma?" Grace smiled kindly. "May I come in?" Amira stepped aside nervously. The small home looked even smaller beside the billionaire's mother's grace and presence. Grace looked around quietly before sitting down. "So this is where you live," she said softly. "Simple, but peaceful." Amira stood unsure. "Why are you here, Ma?" Grace turned to her with a warm smile. "To see my grandchild." Amira blinked. "Grandchild?" Grace's eyes softened. "Yes. Don't be afraid, my dear. I only came to ensure you're cared for. You deserve better than this." Amira shook her head. "With all respect, Ma, I don't want your pity or your money." Grace sighed gently. "Stubborn just like him." "Like who?" "Leonard," she said with a small chuckle. "He's angry now, but he'll come around. That boy has my blood, and when a Cole loves, he loves fiercely." Amira lowered her eyes. "He doesn't love me, Ma. He doesn't even trust me." Grace smiled knowingly. "Then let fate finish what I started." That night, Leonard drove aimlessly through the city streets, rain misting on his windshield. He didn't even know where he was going, until he found himself outside a small market road. He parked and looked across, and there she was. Amira walking home under a torn umbrella, clutching a bag of groceries. Her sandals splashed through puddles, her dress soaked, yet she walked with quiet strength. Leonard's heart twisted. For the first time he saw her, not as the poor girl who helped his mother or the woman carrying his child, but as someone real, brave, kind, and pure. He stepped out of the car, approaching slowly. "Amira," he called softly. She froze, turning. Rain dripped down her face, her eyes wide in surprise. "Leonard?" He moved closer, holding out his umbrella. "You'll get sick." She hesitated, then took it gently. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said quietly. "But I had to see you." For a long moment they stood in the rain, silence speaking louder than words. Finally Leonard said, "I believe you now. About that night. About everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why now?" He exhaled, his voice breaking slightly. "Because I realized I can't stop thinking about you." Amira stared at him, disbelief, relief, and confusion all at once. Leonard's tone softened. "You changed something in me, Amira. I don't know what this means yet. But I know I don't want to lose you." Leonard walked her home, shielding her from the rain. When they reached her door, he paused. "Can I visit you tomorrow?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "If you're not afraid of getting your shoes dirty." He chuckled softly, something he hadn't done in weeks. "For you, I'll walk barefoot." They shared a quiet laugh, the tension melting into something tender. As she went inside, he stood watching, rain glistening on his face. For the first time he didn't feel trapped, he felt free. Back at the mansion, Madame Grace watched the rain from her window, sipping tea. Her phone buzzed, a message from her driver: "Sir Leonard visited Miss Amira tonight." She smiled to herself, whispering, "Love always finds its way even through my sins." Her eyes glistened with both pride and guilt. "Forgive me, Leonard. I only wanted to give you what time couldn't." As the storm cleared and moonlight broke through, a new peace settled over her face. 2 days later, Amira woke up to the sound of car horns and murmurs outside her small home. When she peeked through the curtain, she froze. A sleek black SUV, the same one she'd seen before, was parked outside. Standing beside it was Leonard, dressed in a tailored black suit, his expression unreadable. Her heart began to race. "Leonard?" she whispered to herself. Before she could compose herself, he was already knocking softly on her door. When she opened it, he smiled, warm yet nervous. "Good morning." She stepped aside hesitantly. "You came early." He nodded. "I couldn't wait." The way he looked at her, with quiet awe, made her cheeks flush. He glanced around the room, noticing the peeling walls, the sewing machine, and her brother's drawings pinned to the wall. "This is where you live?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said, a little embarrassed. "It's small, but it's home." He smiled faintly. "Peaceful." For a moment, silence stretched between them, soft and heavy, a silence filled with unspoken things. Amira, nervous but wanting to be polite, offered him breakfast, yam and eggs with a cup of tea served in a chipped mug. Leonard accepted it without hesitation, sitting on the old wooden chair that creaked under his weight. When Tund ran into the room and froze, Leonard turned to him with a kind smile. "Hey chap, You must be Tund. The boy nodded shyly. You're the man from the big car. Leonard chuckled. Yes, but today I'm just a friend having breakfast. Amira watched them, surprised by how natural he was with her brother. Laughing, teasing, even helping him pour water without a hint of arrogance. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before. For the first time she saw Leonard, not the billionaire. After breakfast, Leonard stood near the doorway. Amira, he said softly, I want to show you something. She frowned slightly. Show me? He nodded. I want you to see my world. Not the business, not the money, but the place I escape to when life feels heavy. Hesitant but curious, she agreed. They drove in silence for a while. The city gave way to wide open fields and tall palm trees swaying in the wind. Finally, they stopped at a hidden coastal estate surrounded by gardens and sea breeze. Amira stepped out, eyes wide. This place is beautiful. It's where I go when I need peace, he said, looking out at the waves. It was my father's retreat. I come here to think, to remember what matters. Amira turned toward him. And what matters to you now? He met her gaze. You. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Leonard smiled faintly. Don't answer. Just be here. With me. They walked together by the water, wind tugging at her dress and his jacket. It wasn't wealth that bound them now, it was something softer, something real. But peace never lasts long when eyes are watching. By the next day, pictures of Leonard and Amira walking together by the coast flooded social media. Billionaire Leonard Cole seen with mystery woman in torn dress, one blog captioned. At the mansion, Madame Grace scrolled through her phone and sighed deeply. She had wanted them to find love, but she had forgotten how cruel the world could be to a woman from the streets. Her phone buzzed nonstop, reporters, board members, even Leonard's assistant asking for clarification. She closed her eyes and murmured, Oh, my son. The world won't understand what the heart chooses. Later that week, Leonard brought Amira to a charity dinner, his first public appearance with her. She wore a borrowed cream dress from Madame Grace, her hair styled simply. She looked radiant yet nervous under the chandelier lights. As they entered, murmurs swept across the hall. Women whispered behind jeweled fans. Men stared in confusion. Leonard ignored them all, holding her hand proudly. You belong here, he whispered. But Amira's smile trembled. Every stare felt like a knife. Every whisper echoed her fears. Poor girl, gold digger, mistake. When a woman in a red gown approached, her voice laced with venom, Leonard, darling, who's your guest? Leonard's tone sharpened. Her name is Amira. Treat her with respect. The woman smirked. Of course. I just didn't know charity extended this far. Amira's heart sank, but Leonard squeezed her hand tightly, his jaw firm. You'll learn to watch your tongue, he said coldly. The hall fell silent. For the first time, Amira realized he wasn't just protecting her. He was choosing her. After the event, as they drove home, Amira looked out the window, silent. Leonard finally spoke. You're upset. She shook her head. No, I'm just not used to being hated for existing. He reached for her hand. Amira, don't let them break you. They don't know your heart. Tears glistened in her eyes. But they know yours, Leonard. You belong to their world. I don't. He turned to her. Then he'll build a new one where we both belong. The car went quiet again, but this time the silence carried hope. Fragile, trembling hope. At home, Madame Grace watched the dinner replay on TV. When she saw Leonard publicly defend Amira, her eyes softened with tears. I did this, she whispered. I brought her into his life. But maybe God had a greater reason. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, perhaps, through her, hell finally learned to love not just with wealth, but with heart. Outside, the city lights shimmered, two worlds colliding, yet somehow beginning to align. The morning after the charity dinner, the headlines exploded across every platform. Billionaire Leonard Cole in love with a maid? From the streets to the penthouse. Who is Amira? Every camera, every voice, every gossip channel hunted for them. Leonard's business partners called in panic, threatening to pull out of contracts. His board of directors demanded a statement. And through it all, Leonard stood in his office, staring out the window in silence. Amira sat in the corner, her eyes downcast, feeling the weight of the world pressing on her chest. This is all my fault, she whispered. He turned to her, his voice steady but gentle. No, Amira. It's mine, for letting them believe they can decide who I love. She looked up at him, her eyes trembling. But they'll destroy everything you built. Leonard walked closer, cupping her face softly. Then let them. You're everything I never knew I was missing. Hours later, Leonard entered the glass-walled conference room of his company. A dozen older men in suits sat stiffly, eyes filled with judgment. One of them slammed a newspaper on the table. "You're tarnishing the Cole legacy for a street girl, Leonard." Leonard stood tall, calm but fierce. "Her name is Amira. And she's worth more than every number in your spreadsheets." The men exchanged looks of disbelief. "You're jeopardizing investors' trust." He interrupted sharply. "Then let them go. I built this empire from ashes once. I can build it again with integrity." For a moment the room fell silent. They realized he wasn't the same emotionless billionaire they once knew. This man had found his heart. That night, unable to bear the chaos surrounding him, Amira packed her small bag quietly. Leonard was asleep in the study, his head resting on the couch, exhaustion painted across his face. She walked to him, tears glistening in her eyes. She whispered softly, "You gave me more than I ever dreamed, Leonard. But I won't let my love destroy your world." She placed a folded note on the table. "Thank you for teaching me what love truly means." Then she left, disappearing into the quiet night, her shadow fading beyond the mansion gates. When Leonard woke up and saw the note, his heart stopped. He searched every street, every old market, every corner of the city, but she was gone. Days turned into weeks. The media moved on. The noise faded. But Leonard didn't. Every day he visited the coastal retreat, the one place she had smiled freely. He'd sit by the water, waiting, hoping, whispering her name into the wind. Months later, on a quiet morning, Leonard sat by the sea again, lost in thought. Then he heard it, the soft laughter of a child behind him. When he turned, he froze. Amira stood a few feet away, holding a baby wrapped in a light blanket. Her eyes glowed with tears and warmth. "Amira," he breathed, standing slowly. She smiled shyly. "I didn't want to come back. But he..." She looked at the baby in her arms. "That he deserves to know his father." Leonard's eyes filled with tears as he walked toward her, his voice breaking. "You came back to me." She nodded gently. "We both did." He took her hand, then looked down at the baby. "Is he?" Amira smiled faintly. "His name is Liam. Liam Leonard Cole." Leonard let out a trembling laugh, pulling them both into his arms. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." At the mansion, Madame Grace stepped out onto the balcony, watching as Leonard carried Amira and the baby inside. Her hands trembled over her heart, tears streaming freely. Finally, she whispered, smiling through her tears, "My grandchild. My family whole again." She turned her gaze upward and whispered to the heavens, "Thank you, God, for turning my greatest mistake into their miracle." A year later, beneath the golden glow of the sunset, Amira walked down a flower-lined aisle on the beach, the same coast where they'd first shared peace. Leonard waited at the altar, dressed in an ivory suit, eyes glistening with love. Madame Grace held baby Liam in her arms, smiling proudly as gentle waves touched the sand. As Amira reached him, Leonard took her hands and whispered, "You were never beneath me, Amira. You were the reason I rose." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "And you were the reason I learned to believe." They exchanged vows, promises not written by wealth or bloodlines, but by two hearts that defied every boundary. When he kissed her, the guests cheered. The ocean breeze carried their laughter across the horizon, like music written by fate itself. Years later, their home stood on that same coast, a blend of luxury and warmth, built with both hands and heart. Amira ran through the garden with little Liam chasing butterflies. Leonard watched them from the veranda, smiling like a man who had finally found peace. He whispered softly, "She was the girl from the streets, who gave me the world." And as the sun dipped below the ocean, its light painting their faces in gold, it was clear. Love, not status, had written the final chapter of their story. If you enjoy this story, please like and subscribe for more of the story. See you again in the next story.